I denne episoden av Portrettpodden.
The number of Vikings I've seen who going through plantations with the trees in straight lines. Yeah. Just like, what are you doing in a Victorian plantation? Well, what? Which species of tree is that? What? There's plenty of real forests out there. Why the heck have you chosen that one, you moron? Different focuses. The actual sword he might be carrying, they might have spent hours and hours on and paid a fortune for. But frankly, as far as I'm concerned, if you're in a 19th century plantation, you might just as well be waving a bit of foam rubber. So you can imagine I'm not very good at watching these programs.
Du hører på Portrettpodden. En podcast hvor jeg intervjuer mennesker som inspirerer meg, som får meg til å tenke, og så hjelper å forstå mer av verden jeg lever i. Historie er ikke en statisk ting, den er i konstant syklisk bevegelse. Med alt som nå foregår i verden, spesielt med Russlands invasjon av Ukraina, er en podcastepisode kanskje ikke øverst på lista over prioriteter, og det forstår jeg, men jeg mener også at man i mørke stunder trenger litt letthet og en mulighet til å le. Mitt navn er Mats Lasse-Jangås, og sammen med min gjest, historiker Ruth Goodman, skal vi være stemmene i hodet ditt den nærmeste timen. Ruth er født i Cardiff i Wales og spesialiserer seg på britisk sosial historie, altså hvordan den gjengse mann og kvinne levde i fortida, med spesielt fokus på Tudor-tida. Ruth er begge lidenskapelig opptatt av historie, og er begge av den oppfatningen at hvordan små grep i det dagligdagse liv former våre moderne tilværelse er mer spennende og tiltalende enn konge og dronninger fra fordums tid. Gjennom hennes ekspertise har hun arbeidet som konsulent for blant andre Victoria and Albert Museum og på filmen Shakespeare in Love, bare for å nevne noe. Latteren sitter løst i denne samtalen, hvor vi prater om TV-serien hun og kollegaen Alex Langlands og Peter Ginn gjorde for BBC, hvordan det er å gjenskape en historisk periode, hvor lite glamorøst det er å gjøre det i en TV-serie, historiske misoppfatninger og mye mer. Husk at du kan støtte Portrettpodden og alt arbeidet som ligger bak hver episode, ved å bli en donor av Portrettpodden på Patreon. For så litt som 100 kroner i måneden får du tilgang til episodene før de slippes. Du kan tipse om gjester, få ditt spørsmål stilt i en episode, og mye mer. Med det ønsker dere riktig god fornøyelse, og her er Ruth Goodman. I'm here with Ruth Goodman. She's a historian specializing in social and domestic history, and you might know her from various BBC shows dating all the way back from the Tudor era up until the Second World War. That's just a fraction of what she's done. We'll get further into that during the course of this conversation. Ruth Goodman, how are you today?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
We meet on a drab, cold, grey Wednesday afternoon. How's life and the whole COVID situation treating you?
Oh gosh, well, it's like everybody, isn't it? Yeah. Life gets changed in the oddest of ways. Yeah.
One learns to adapt.
Yes.
It's also I wouldn't necessarily say it's a good thing that we have a global pandemic, but at least it means that a lot of people are sitting in front of their computers on Zoom, so that makes my job a little bit easier. As I said, you're a historian in social and domestic history, and we'll get into what most people might recognize you for. But how did you get your start in history? What was that one moment where you thought, this is really interesting, I'll dedicate my life to this?
Sort of, yes. I married into it. Okay. Yeah, it's a strange way to get a career and a passion. My husband and I married when we were quite young, and he'd done this historical reenactment since he was a kid. I think he started when he was 12. And in the sort of 18 months in which we got serious and got married, he didn't do it. So I only knew about it like stories from his childhood, rather like I might have been in the Boy Scouts or something. And then a month after we got married, he said, come on then, off we go. What? You want me to do what? The whole concept seemed very strange to me, to dress up in old clothes and go and fight a battle. Never liked the fighting battles bit. I've never liked that. I still worry about it as being dangerously close to a glorification of war. But the people were lovely. The people were really lovely, warm and welcoming and interesting, really interesting people. And then somebody suggested we try a living history in which, it's not about war, it's about the rest of life. And that was the moment. From that moment in, bang, I was hooked. Straight down the library, started researching, discovered that the things I wanted to know about were not in the library. Started having to learn how to find out stuff that wasn't, on the main shelves, teaching myself to research, really. I just got hooked instantly. And the pair of us have shared it as a passion ever since. He sort of eventually more or less left the military behind. And we both share real strong interests in the history of food, in the history of clothes, in the history of ordinary people doing ordinary things. It just took over life. What can I say? It just did.
It's usually the case with common passion that usually takes up much of your life, but that you're also able to turn into a career. Not everyone are that lucky.
It took some time, I'll be honest. People forever saying to me, like, how do I get your job? Is there a course I can go? What can I say? I worked for almost free for 20 years. I just like slogged my guts out for years and years and years for next to no money. That's how I got my job.
I had a few questions. I figured you went to the traditional route, so to say, with university.
I didn't. I went to university, but I didn't study history.
No, okay.
So...
Well, some people get into debt and some people do reenactments.
Yeah.
There are many ways to roam. So the everyday working life of normal people in the bygone era, that's more fascinating than necessarily fighting as King Arthur.
And I'm not very interested in kings and queens or generals anyway. No. I don't actually think they're as important as people make out. No. We're all told that these are the people who make history, that it's really important. And I think when you start looking closely, they're more like the scum that rises to the top of a pot. Yeah. They're very visible, but they're not the main body of what's going on. They don't really change the world that much. No. I sort of challenge people. Perhaps the most, if you were going to say king, general, who's the most important person? Perhaps Napoleon. Say somebody like Napoleon. Everybody says really big impact. It's not just one country. It's it's supposedly big stuff. But you compare that with, for example, the British habit of drinking tea. Yeah. Now, globally, in the long run, it's definitely the tea that's had more impact, isn't it? Yeah. It really is. and I feel like that about a lot of history. We make a big fuss about these big names, these celebrity people from the past. And I honestly think they're overrated.
I have to admit, with all due respect, of course, I drink tea a lot more often than I think about Lord Nelson, for example. Yeah. The whole world trade system, these things have impact upon people right across the globe, even now, all these years later, and big impacts, not little tiny friddly around the edges. No. Yeah. Well, I suppose
it's tea now too. I'm sorry about that. I am an addict.
Continuing stereotypes even through Zoom.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I find it also a bit fascinating, the I wouldn't say hypocrisy, because that is a very, very strong word, but at least here in Norway, we don't have the aristocracy. We don't have the upper class as you do in the UK. So we usually just had the rich and the rest. And even our king is on informal terms when we are lucky enough to meet him. So we don't necessarily think all that much about that someone better or bigger than us. But at the same time, when the Duke of Edinburgh passed away, I can more or less guarantee you that 8 out of 10 households was watching the funeral.
Really?
Yeah.
Gosh, I didn't.
Okay.
My father actually knew him, so they worked together.
Really?
So
okay. Wasn't thinking about talking too much about your parents, but how did your father know him?
Oh, he was. My father was very involved in a lot of the early conservation movement. He was planning officer, and was very excited and interested in countryside management and planning, and trying to. In the days before people were saying things like environmental and conservation, way back in the 70s and 80s, setting up all sorts of structures and working with them. So, and that was something, obviously, that the Duke of Edinburgh was also very interested in and passionate about. And they ended up on all sorts of different committees and bodies together.
Yeah. So in a sense, you have a link to the British royal family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps not a tangible link, but nonetheless. Okay. Huh. Interesting. Well, as we say, there's this. I think we both agree that the lives of normal in air quotes people are more interesting than kings and queens, although they get a lot more attention, of course. And your work, your interest, your field of expertise, going back to the BBC shows, for example. How did you get involved in that type of? What is the journey
they rang
from
me
the?
Up out of the blue. I mean, they were making a program, and they wanted somebody with particular skill sets, and just there weren't very many of us.
Okay.
It was a very small pool. When they rang me up first, I said no. And then they tried to find somebody else. They tried me again, and I said no a second time. It was on the 5th occasion that they asked that I finally gave in and said, yeah, all right, you can have 1 week in 4. Because initially they wanted me to go away and live for a year and on a farm, and that's fine. But I had a family and I had a business. Yeah. You can't walk away from that. So eventually we compromised. I'd give them 1 week out of 4. And we'd manage it on that. Yeah.
Steady go.
Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to Tudor England to work as ordinary farmers under the watchful eye of a monastic landlord.
So what you're saying is that the offer of living a full year on a farm, pretending to be in the Tudor era, let's say, was not as enticing as being at home with your family and having.
I like my family.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
Who'd have thought? Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose, I've been reenacting for a very long time. And, so it's not like it was something out of the blue for me or new for me. And actually, from a filming point of view, that's really good because however much, if you're sitting watching the television, you think you're seeing something real, it's completely constructed. Yeah. It's really important to remember that. Television takes ages to make. It's a really slow process with a big team of people. Well, big-ish. We did it in a very small team. But nonetheless, a team of people who are working together. You have to repeat things over and over and over and over again. It cannot be real time. If you're watching something that looks like real time, you're watching something that has been put together to resemble real time. There is no such thing as reality TV. That exists only in the heads of journalists. So, I found that having done years of reenacting without the television cameras there, and sometimes and quite often without the members of the public for quite long lengths of time. You know, I had a lot of experience to bring to it. So I knew what I was trying to portray, what I was wanting to talk about. I knew how these jobs all went before the cameras were rolling. And it was much easier to bring that to it rather than to be discovering something for the first time. So, you know, I think it made better telly because I knew what the hell I was on about.
Watched all the shows in chronologically a few years ago. And all I'm able to think is there's probably 15, 20 guys behind her with cameras and lighting and everything. And
no, we didn't have that many. No, we did it on a shoestring. It would be one guy with a camera.
Okay. But still, you're trying to explain something about the daily life of the Edwardian era, then suddenly a cow decides to be an asshole.
Exactly. And then you've got to start again.
Yeah.
We had enormous trouble with vehicles, particularly, I think the third series we did, we were in a valley, and I swear there was one great big tractory lorry thing that spent the entire year going backwards. Beep, this vehicle is reversing. Beep, this vehicle is reversing. Beep, this bit across the valley, you know, like, again.
Yeah. And there you are, just trying to wash the bloody floors.
This vehicle is reversing.
So it's not as glamorous as people might think to do.
It's not glamorous at all, I can assure you. Not even a little bit. I have the largest stock of woolly thermal underwear known to womankind. This freezing filming, because you often don't move very much. You know, a lot of it is standing around waiting for the technical stuff to be ready. So you'll do a little burst of activity, and then you'll stand, and you might stand for 2 hours, and you're constantly on call. It's not like you can go away and do something because they're not quite sure when they're going to be ready, when they're going to be, you know. So you stand there. Doing nothing, freezing to death. Everybody else is running around. No, stay there. No, we don't continuously stay there. It's all right if you're fully dressed, but I think quite a lot of those scenes I was doing things in my nightie. You know, you stood there bare feet in your nightie, you know, -6 degrees. Everybody else is in their thermals and their hats and their socks, but you're there in a nightie going, come on, can we film this, please?
No, sir, the lighting isn't right yet. So ask maybe an obvious follow-up question, but what does then entice you to come back to do more series of the show?
Because I am passionate about it. I mean, genuinely, I think it's deeply, deeply interesting. And I also feel very strongly that because these things don't get talked about a lot, you know, they get hidden. This is the hidden history, isn't it? It's not hidden because it's some sort of glamorous secret hidden. It's hidden because people have chosen not to look. They haven't realized that it was interesting. And I really feel very strongly a sort of almost like, it sounds a bit pretentious, really, a bit of a mission to just, you know, spread the word that, you know, we all have a history, not just the rich and the glamorous. We all have a history, and it's important and it's valuable and it is interesting, you know? And I really just want to spread that word. That's what pulls me back over and over again. And I also find the experiences themselves interesting. They're part of the research process. So, you know, and when you can read books till the cows come home, but unless you've actually stood there with the cows being cold in the field, you know,
when they come home,
you're always going to miss some element of it. And I find that doing the practical things, it makes you realize what you don't know. Like if you're actually doing a job and you suddenly realize that all the books have skipped from, you know, A, B, C, and they've gone straight to G, and they've missed out D, E, and F. You know, well, how do I get from there to there? What did they do for this bit? You know, and so then you go back and you do different research, because now I'm focused on, there's a really strange gap here. You know, why? Why don't I know this? Where do I find out? How do I approach this problem? You know, it's a detective thing. And then you get some little clues from the research, and you go back and you try it again, and you think, I'm not sure I've still got this right. And you go back, and I find it is like being a detective, and that's quite exciting.
Yeah. The good thing about having it documented on BBC is that it's there for all to see for future generations. So if we were to forget about it, then at least we have
some sort of record.
Yeah. We can all look at you freezing in the middle of the night.
Yeah. How cold was it in the past? Very cold.
Yeah, very cold. And they had lorries everywhere that was backing up.
Yeah, and always lorries going back.
It's so ahead of the time in the Tamar Valley. Might be a boring question to answer, but what is then your favorite historical period?
Oh, it's the Tudor, definitely. The late 16th century. By so much I can't tell you. That's really where my passion lies. I just find it's a sort of halfway world. Like, many of the things about it are recognizable in the modern, but so much isn't. It's like a tipping point in which the modern seems to emerge. It's also a time of great change, and that left room for ordinary people with spark to sort of make a mark and to explore life in different ways. There've been any number of these moments in history, haven't there, in which, the sort of like the rigid structure sort of crumbles and breaks. And then if you're an interested and excited, person with drive and ambition, there's a little bit more room, to break out of the mold and be more individual. And this is definitely an era in which there's a lot of that going on. Ordinary men, ordinary women have got a bit more sort of room for manoeuvre. And I find that quite exciting. I mean, the religious change, so extreme. But what that really did was challenge ordinary people to do their own thinking. You don't just blindly follow on what your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents have always thought and always, this is a time of challenge, and ordinary people are being challenged to think. Yeah. Do you agree with this? Do you agree with that? Are you going to follow this type or that type? There were choices to be made, really quite earth-shattering, major intellectual choices to be made, and ordinary people were making them. There was a freedom there. Print is coming in. Ideas are moving around. That's quite interesting, quite exciting, really. And you see evidence of, very poor people who were right at the bottom of social pyramids, and you would think that their lives were totally rigid and set out and organised by others, and they've got room for manoeuvre, at least inside here. Yeah. And that's quite exciting.
Mm-hmm. That's also partly why I wanted to have you on this podcast, because I think if I ask people what they first think of when I say Tudor period, they think of Henry VIII.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Or to a certain extent, horrible histories.
Which are fun, let's be honest. Horrible histories are fun.
Yeah. We had a rubbish history teacher in school, but at least we had horrible histories.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I know nothing about what I was supposed to learn about Norwegian history, but I know what happened to all his wives. So that song is still stuck in my head.
Stuck in your head.
Divorced, beheaded and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. I'm Henry VIII, I had 6 or 8 wives. Some might say I ruined their lives.
That's what irks me a bit, is that most people think about the kings and the nobility, and if they perchance think of the normal working class people, they think of rats and living in filth and 15 people in one room, but that's not necessarily the case.
No, it's not. I mean, I'm sure there were people who lived 15 in one room with rats, and these things happen. They still happen, don't they? To this day, you can still find that in the modern world quite easily. But no, it wasn't what people were aiming at. It wasn't the norm of life. People were looking for cleanliness, whether they could get it or not. They were looking for order and meaning and enjoyment. And, they were human beings, the same as the rest of us. And there's huge variety in human experience at any point in history. Yeah. And that's important to always remember, isn't it? We're talking about people. We're not talking about dolls or automatons, or we're talking about the huge variety of humanity.
I imagine at least that most of the people living in 1600s weren't necessarily thinking that acutely about what we today might think of them or how we would remember them. But we have this vast amount of knowledge about them because they lived their lives, because they documented everything. They wrote diaries, and we have people like you who are passionate about telling their stories to the new generation and those who might not know about our past. But how do you think then people would look back on us today and the society we live in?
Gosh, it's hard to know. It depends which way the world goes, doesn't it? If we don't sort out the climate, then they're just going to hate us.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that. They're just going to think we're the most foul, selfish, greedy, unpleasant people of all time. Yeah. And they might have a point.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, if by some miracle we do manage to boot out the idiots and actually do something as opposed to standing there with empty hot wind, making promises we're never going to keep, then maybe people will look back on us as a turning point. Gosh, let's hope for that, eh?
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Do all you can.
That's and the booting out the idiots is sadly universal as well, because we don't have to mention names, but I think someone listening to this in Norway or in the UK might know exactly who we're talking about. So here's hoping we might be remembered for more than just Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, quite.
But then to flip the question there, would you then, if you had the opportunity, would then go back in time rather than live?
No way. I mean, I've done quite enough of it to know how hard it was. I mean, that's the thing that really comes through, Like I've mentioned the cold. I mean, the ability to have central heating in your house is, it's so lovely. It's so lovely. And even really simple things. We all acknowledge that running water is the most amazing thing. But have you ever even thought about something as simple as the plug and the drain to get rid of it afterwards? Yeah. It's not just the supply coming in, it's also, going away again. World in which you have to take by bucket every single drop of dirty water back out of your house and find somewhere to put it. Just take... Yeah, the past was inordinately, for those of us in Northern Europe, inordinately cold and horribly hard work. I mean, grimly hard. And that's without thinking of disease. No. Just grimly hard work. We are so soft. And it's lovely being soft, isn't it? Isn't it just great, Yeah. And look, you and I, we're not in the first flush of youth. I mean, what are the chances if we'd been born in 1600 that we'd still be alive at this age? Yeah. The past is hard.
Yeah. I don't think my chances would be too high of reaching 30 in the 1600s. Then at least I would be remembered for the oldest man alive or something. No, okay, so you're not going back in time then. Is there one thing from the work you've done with the TV series or the work outside of television, so one item or object from the past you'd like to bring back into our modern life?
Object? No, I don't think so. I mean, I like what I think I would like most is the control over life. I think one of the things that upsets me most about modern life is the way increasing, and during my lifetime this has got more and more and more, is how passive the majority of the population are. Yeah. How little control they have over their lives, and they're willing to give it up so easily. Oh yeah, you can have all my data and know everything about me in exchange for almost nothing. Almost nothing. People are willing to settle for very little.
Yeah.
Do as they're told. And adverts are particularly good at telling you what to do and what to think. You will have these attitudes, you will wear this, you will speak this, you will eat this, you will like this. This is what you will like. You will think this.
Yeah.
And I find that sort of element really quite unpleasant, I'll be honest. Now, in the past, we know that people were told what to think religiously. There was huge pressure on that. But there was a lot of other freedom for making your own decisions, for working things out, which seems to have been just sort of eroded and eroded and eroded. I mean, just think of the simplest things in your home. We're all told you have to buy a magic stuff off the shelf to be clean. That's the only way to be clean, is to buy our magic stuff. Magic stuff. Yes, lovely magic stuff. See our magic stuff, and magic. Nobody knows what's in this stuff. Nobody knows why it works or how it works or whether it does work. We're all just told it's magic stuff that we have to have. Whereas not so very long ago, you would you'd be brought up to know what certain things did, how they behaved, and you could make your own decisions. You could decide that you wanted that chemical on that and that on that, and you want to scrub that, and you would do this to that, and you'd have a range of things, and you'd be in charge of that. You'd have that body of knowledge. You'd be expected to be able to make judgments and think about it. And, it wasn't set out for you in the same way. You were expected to be an intelligent person making your own decisions, and that's something I miss.
Yeah, I also think that George Orwell would roll in his grave when he knew that in the past we would work from sun up to sun down because that's when we had light, and now we're all sitting on the couch looking at Facebook and giving away all the data and arguing about COVID and attacks on privacy.
Working hours have also lengthened again, haven't they? I mean, that's something, if you look at the Victorian, there's all these new rules coming in to try and shorten working hours, particularly initially for children and then for women and then for men as well. And you get within certain industries. And you do get, so down to the mid-20th century, we actually do more or less not for women at housework. That's never been any shorter. But for people in paid work, we really did get down to an 8-hour day. Well, in Britain, that's a mythical past now. I mean, how many people do I know who only work for the hours they're paid? I mean, hardly anybody. No. Almost everybody I know in my family and friends works at least double for the hours that they're actually paid. And one is expected to, and if one doesn't, one loses one's job. Yeah. I mean, it's rubbish. Yeah. Absolutely rubbish. Yeah. Sorry, I'm ranting.
No, good. I like your rants. Keep them coming. But the mythos of the 8-hour working day, it
is utterly mythological. I mean, I think it really did exist for a while, but not in, not in our sort of, it's quite a way back, isn't it? Yeah. There was that sort of little period. But then lots of things like that, things that we think might have a much longer history, actually have a quite short history. So, many people, for example, think that women staying at home is the historical pattern because it was the historical pattern in the early 20th century. Yep. The very end of the 19th and the early 20th century, that was the pattern. And we assumed that that's the pattern, and we pushed that pattern back into the deep past. But when you look, it was only in that little bit. It wasn't in the deep past. If you were to look in 1600, 1700, 1800 even, women working outside the home was normal. Yeah. That's the majority of women had some work outside the home as well as within the home. And it's only in this sort of early 20th century bubble that the pattern of the woman in and the man out is really sitting there in a full form. Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the things that's quite interesting about being somebody who is engaged in talking about the past is how often you have to fight against that sort of idea of the past. People perpetuate a fantasy version and push it onto the realities of the past. And sometimes it's a very obvious fantasy version, in which everybody's rich and is a king or queen or princess and wanders around in pearls. But sometimes, but even the fantasy idea of the peasant, actually, you mentioned it earlier, the fantasy idea of a peasant who lives in squalor with loads of rats and disease and that is as much a modern push on the past as anything. It's it's not really what you find when you look.
No.
And there's a lot of that goes on. I find a lot of modern misogyny is expressed in, so that people say, oh, well, women didn't do that in the past. Well, they did. All the evidence is there. They did. There's loads of evidence. I can show you individual examples. I can show you all sorts. Yes, there's a woman ploughing. Yes, there's a woman doing this. There's a woman doing that. It might not have been, as common as a man doing it, but they're there. They're doing it, but the modern mind doesn't want to see that.
No.
It wants to see the past as very, very misogynistic and gendered, which sort of gives an excuse for the present. You get a lot of that going on.
Yeah, and speak of the modern misogynies, I feel my view at least is that a lot of misogynistic men are looking back upon the past and thinking that
it was a glorious time for blokes. Yeah.
And I'm a white Western middle-aged man. I know what the past was like, and the women were just in the kitchen where they belonged, in air quotes, and we were kings of our own castle, and it's just rubbish.
There's a lot of that goes on. And it's utter rubbish. Absolute utter rubbish. As soon as you look at the evidence, the past is very varied. It's much more multicultural than you might imagine. People were moving around from place to place. They were bringing ideas. They were living their lives, men and women. There's people turning up doing interesting, different things all over the place all the time. And the past also changes very frequently. Again, another thing I often hear people say is, oh, but things change so much faster now. No.
No.
Really? No. Again, as soon as you look, you can see that constant change is about the only constant thing of history is constant change. And then people go on about, oh, yes, but it's only little changes. I think you'll find that a change in the nature of a plough that allows 20% more people to eat is really quite important. That is not minor. It's honestly, it's more important than a bloody mobile phone. One of the joys of history is sort of like unpicking it. It's about, it's an exploration into a completely different world, it's like anthropology. It's also a bit like space exploration. I mean, it's sort of like, you have to unpick everything you know and really look and really be open to what you're hearing and what you're seeing and what you're feeling even, when you're handling objects and so forth. And what emerges is this enormously complex, subtle, ever-changing world, which, it's very, very satisfying in many ways. None of it is simple. None of it's ever cut and dried,
That's why I also find it a bit embarrassing, our lack of knowledge about our own histories. I had a classmate in junior high, I won't mention her name, who thought that the milk in the shops came from the shops.
Yeah.
She's never seen a farmer in her entire life, I think.
There's quite a bit of that these days, isn't there? It's hard, there's such a lot to know about the world. You can't know everything, and we all have our blank spots. We all have them. I have some huge whopping ones, particularly if it comes to anything to do with music, sport, or soap operas. But there are other things you don't even know you've got a gap, because you know so little about it. You don't even know that there's something to know. And we're all in that situation. Some people, however, seem to wander around with their eyes closed and their ears stoppered up, don't they? And other people are very open to open to the world and are picking up information everywhere. I think it's more fun being an open-minded person. I think one has a better life. More interesting, varied, richer life.
And those who refuse to learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
They are, and I think it's also, what history teaches you is that everything changes, and actually, I think that's a really important lesson. So often in our lives, people feel unable to change. They feel, stuck. They say, oh, we've always done it like that. It has, there's no way around it. Well, that's just not true. We have not always done it like that. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. No. It has not always been that way. It has not always been done like that. As soon as you start looking, it's been done in about a dozen different ways at different times. Mm-hmm. And, change is the only thing that is constant. So if you don't like what something is now, it is not stuck. It is not set in stone. It can change. It has changed before. Mm-hmm. So why the heck couldn't it change now? Yeah. And, the where we are now is the sum total of of things that have gone before. Mm-hmm. And that's useful too, to know, well, we do it like this because of that, but that doesn't apply anymore. No. So why are we still doing it like this? Mm-hmm. Couldn't we try? I actually think that if you think of history in that way, it's a very good tool for liberating you towards the future. It's in some ways, the more you know about the past, the less you should be bogged down in it. Yeah. Don't be trapped by it. It's a constantly changing, very subtle, very different. There is no pattern that you have to follow. No. Everything's up for grabs. Mm-hmm.
And if his history was stuck, then we would all still be plowing the fields in a feudal society and freezing our asses off in our knickers.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're not. So obviously things are evolving.
Stuff changes.
Yeah. As I also failed to mention in the introduction, you've also been a consultant on for example, Shakespeare in Love, and you worked for the Globe Theatre, and but focusing on TV and movies. When at least here in Norway, when we get stuff imported from the UK, is usually Downton Abbey or to a certain extent Outlander. It's usually those period dramas where we mostly follow the upper class. In my view, is at least that life and times and the hardships of the peasant folk might not be as sexy for TV executives. So what are some misconceptions about history that you that irks you when you watch TV?
I can't watch them. I can't watch any of that period drama. Okay. But I just end up shouting at the telly all the time.
No, okay.
I mean, I understand, for a start, no matter how big your budget is, you're never actually going to be able to go back in time and do it utterly accurately. One understands that. There are always limitations. You can't film non-such palace because it doesn't exist. It was pulled down. It's not there to film. You can't put the king in the place he was supposed to be. You have to put him in somewhere that's a bit like it-ish. Do your best, know? I mean, and all representations are going to be compromises. That's just, but also what sort of things you focus on are going to be. You can see a presentation which I get, but one aspect very good, and that aspect they're just like not even thought about, and it would be dreadful. The number of Vikings I've seen who going through plantations with the trees in straight lines, just like, what are you doing in a Victorian plantation? Well, what? Which species of tree is that? What? There's plenty of real forests out there. Why the heck have you chosen that one, you moron? Different focuses. The actual sword he might be carrying, they might have spent hours and hours on and paid a fortune for. But frankly, as far as I'm concerned, if you're in a 19th century plantation, you might just as well be waving a bit of faux rubber. So you can imagine I'm not very good at watching these programs. To my mind, they all, as you say, they always focus on these sort of celebrity figures from the past, which I get very bored with very quickly. There's so many other stories out there. Stories that are, in fact, really interesting and exciting and dramatic, and if only they'd bother to look. But they don't. And I get bits tired of the same stories, round and round and round and round. Oh, we're on Henry VIII and his 6 wives again, are we? Again? Really?
Spoiler, they die.
Here. And they also tend to, there's a real danger that, you know, even if people put a huge amount of work into something like that, they tend to forget that people have lived for longer. So, like, if you've got, I don't know, something set in the 1960s, everybody will be wearing 1960s fashion. They'll all be driving 1960s cars. They'll all be using 1960s crockery. And you know, if you were there in the 60s, and I was just, I can assure you there was a heck of a lot of 30s, 40s and 50s stuff hanging about.
Yeah.
You know? And it wasn't all top of the range, you know, pristine, ideal home stuff either. A lot of it was fairly chipped, cracked, worn, mended. And that sort of, you know, super glossy, utterly curated sort of vision that you get on screen, that irritates me too. I could go on for hours. I could bore you for, I don't know about you running over, I could bore you for weeks.
I have time.
That's stuff I find wrong in historical stuff. I can't watch it. I just shout too much.
I would love to be a fly on the wall when you and your husband watch a historical picture. Oh, look at the sword. Look at the sword. It's amazing. There's the real sword.
Oh, my husband's just as bad. The two of us ranting away. Finger pointing. Mind you, there's also the other game we play, because we've been doing this thing for such a long time, and you're involved so heavily in this world that quite often, and what we're actually pointing out, oh, look who made that sword. And I've got that from you know, most of the suppliers, you know, so loads of our friends make money by making various prop things. You know, they might make for the museum market, you know, as their primary, but you know, if a film thing comes along, you know, it's very handy because they'll usually pay twice as much. It sort of subsidizes the more academic work. So one spots things.
That's what irritates me too, is that we know that the Vikings went to the UK and we pillaged and raped and did nasty things, and I do apologize.
And then you settled and became us, and we are you. Yeah.
But all the, regardless of what sort of show or movie it is, we all wear horns on our helmets.
Horns on the head. I know.
Why?
Stupid horned helmet.
Yeah.
Thing. Oh my goodness.
Bloody German opera. And then we all go to Lindisfarne, every single one of us. And that's the only place we go, apparently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, poor Lindisfarne. It just rebuilt, and then the next group comes along. I can't watch it here.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny, isn't it? I'm told that I probably have Norwegian ancestry, because my family, that thing in which the hand does that as you get older. Yeah, both sides of my family, that happens, and it's supposed to be a marker of Norwegian heritage. So, hello.
Hello. If you go on long enough, we might be related.
We must be. But basically, everybody on the planet is related to everybody else. So,
more or less, well, time is rapidly racing away from me when we're having fun. Just in closing the last 4 minutes now, is there anything? Well, you spoke about the arduous work of shooting the TV shows, and how that's not as glamorous as it might seem on television. So one thing you've learned from your work, looking back into the past, that made you learn something new about yourself?
About myself?
Yeah.
I don't really know, because I've been doing it since I was, you know, straight out of university. I've been doing it for what now? God, 40 years, something like that, perhaps more.
Okay.
I can't really separate out who I was before.
No.
I don't know who I would be without the history, so I really can't answer you.
No, okay. Okay. It's the one thing. Well, to rephrase then, is one thing that you've in your modern life taken for granted, that you've learned to value more when living in the past, so to speak?
Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, I really find it difficult to separate out the sort of historical lessons I've been learning all my life, because they're all my life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of my cooking I learned over fires. In that, I've probably cooked more food over a fire in some sort of historical context than I have in a modern kitchen. I mean, obviously I've got a family and I, cook modern sort of pretty much every day. But when you think about it, I'm often away and cooking for much larger numbers of people. I've done a huge amount of that sort of thing. And the two obviously inform one another. Things you eat in one context, you bring quietly get incorporated. I often don't even realize I've done it. It's only when somebody else comes and goes, well, what's this? And you go, well, it's a formaty, isn't it? And they give you this look, and that's the moment you realize that it's something historical you brought home. I just hadn't really noticed it until somebody else realized somebody else didn't know what I was on about. And that happens with my speech. It happens with the way definitely the way I use textiles and clothing. That's very different from other people's behaviour and ideas about textiles and clothing. There's no doubt about it. It really is. I just get brought up short every now and again. Oh, you didn't? Oh, that isn't common knowledge? Oh, I thought it was.
That's your fault, not mine.
I mean, when we were at the Globe, that really became obvious. When I remember sitting at the very first performance, we got involved right at the beginning when the Globe Theatre first opened. It was the most amazing experience. I learned so much from some really interesting people. I'd never had anything to do with theatre before. It was like a crash course. I remember watching the first performance, and I and my husband and we were laughing and laughing and laughing. Shakespeare is really funny.
Yeah.
Nobody else was. It was like this silence around us. Was very serious, po-face, educational, yes, very worthy. And we think, this is really rude. This is disgusting and very funny. And they're po-faced. And I suddenly realised that, like this supposedly educated audience hadn't a clue what was being said most of the time.
No.
They didn't know what it meant. They had no idea how rude it was. So that was a bit of a shock to the system. And that happens all the time. I don't know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know what other people know and what other people don't know. I'm constantly surprised by everything in life.
Yeah. Well, thanks to you, at least a lot of people know a lot more than they used to about where we came from and where we're going to a certain extent. To end on a poetic note, your husband is into reenactment. You mentioned you're working with social and domestic history. Your daughter is also in the field in a way. So do you feel that that the past is in safe hands going on into the future?
Oh, there's loads of people interested in many different ways. Yeah, I mean. And academically, I think it's moved on a lot. I mean, history used to be written only by men who had been brought up within an elite educational system. Yeah. So naturally, they wrote history about themselves. I mean, I think that's about a lot. I mean, almost all history up to about 1950 was written by elite blokes talking about their own family members. It's sort of, posh family history. That's why it's all about they're writing about their own grandfathers and uncles, and that's why it's about elite people, because it was written by elite people. Yeah. That has changed, and it's changed right across the world at different rates in different places. But now there are people from many backgrounds and from different parts of the world who are all turning their focus on the past, and they see different things because they come from different backgrounds themselves. They interpret it in different ways. They looking for different aspects, and they're seeing it there. And so a much richer history is emerging now as people look into different areas. They look into it in different ways. There's a much more joining up of different disciplines. So, museum curators and archaeologists get much more of a look in on the historical process and vice versa. There's a much bigger element of sharing of approaches and techniques than there was. I think history is in a very good place. I think it's more robust, more meaningful than it has ever been before.
Yeah. most people, whether we like to think about it or not, are living our lives and living history, as it were, because, as we already discussed, history is evolving and not stuck. And on that note, it's been a pleasure to spend a bit of my life together with you today and get to know you a bit better and having a lot of laughs.
Thank you so much. It's been great fun.
Thank you. Du har hørt på en episode av Portrettpodden med meg, Mats Lassiangos, og min gjest i denne episoden var historiker Ruth Goodman. Min takk til Ruth for at hun tok seg tid til å være med i denne episoden. Har du gjort noen tanker mens du har hørt på? Har du ris eller ros eller tips som skal komme, så kan du rette til Portrettpodden sine Facebook-sider, eller på e-post til portrettpodden@gmail.com. Alle lydklipp i denne episoden benyttet i henhold til sitatrett. Portrettpodden arbeider i henhold til Vær varsom-plakatens regler for god presseskikk. Takk for at nettopp du hørte på, og vi høres snart igjen.